It is an ordinary afternoon in a chemist's shop, somewhere in the Western world, right at the turn of the 20th century. And it is a lovely shop. The light comes soft through the front window and lies in long bars across a floor of polished wood. Behind the counter, shelf upon shelf of small glass bottles stand in tidy rows, each with its neat printed label, each promising some small relief from the ordinary miseries of being alive. There is a bottle for the headache, a bottle for the stomach, a bottle for the nerves, and there, at eye level, respectable as milk, is a bottle for the cough. It is made by one of the most trusted names in the world. A great German firm, a firm of chemists and scientists, a firm whose products you would hand to your own mother without a second thought. The label is clean and modern and reassuring. It says that what is inside is a sedative for the cough, gentle and effective. And this is the part I need you to hold on to, that it is safe, not habit-forming, a better, kinder alternative to the older medicines, something you could give, the makers suggested, even to a child worn ragged by a winter of coughing. A respectable woman buys a bottle for her household, the way you might buy cough syrup this very week. The chemist wraps it in paper. Nobody in that bright, orderly shop feels the smallest flicker of alarm. And why would they? It is medicine from the finest firm on earth, sold openly over the counter to anyone who asks. There is only one detail I have left out. The name printed on that reassuring label, the trademark this great firm chose for its gentle cough remedy, was a single word. The word was heroin. Let me stop there and introduce myself, because a story like this one deserves to be told slowly and carefully by someone who will neither sensationalize it nor look away from it. My name is Hollis. I spent a long working life as a coroner and a pathologist, the person they called when something had gone terribly wrong and the living needed to understand, precisely and honestly, why. My whole career was the patient reconstruction of how a thing came to happen, not to point a finger, to understand. And that habit is exactly what this story needs, because the easy version of it, the version you may already have half heard, told for a cheap gasp at a party, is that an evil company sold heroin to babies and got away with it. And I am not going to give you that version because it is lazy, and it is not quite true, and the true one is so much more unsettling. What I am going to give you instead is the harder thing, a story about intelligent, respectable, genuinely gifted people, at a firm that also gave the world one of the great blessings of modern medicine, who looked at a real and terrible problem, reached for what they sincerely believed was the safe solution, and were catastrophically, historically wrong. And let me be as clear as I can be right at the top, because with this particular subject it matters more than usual. Everything I am about to tell you is history. It is not advice. Nothing in it is a recommendation about anyone's health or about any substance then or now, and nothing in it should be read as one. There will be no how, no method, no glamour, and no excuse. This is the account of a mistake, an enormous, well-mannered, respectable mistake, and of what it cost. Nothing more and nothing less. To understand how a great firm came to put that word on that label, and it is genuinely important that you understand it rather than simply recoil. You have to go back and stand in that world for a moment and feel how different it was from yours. It was, above almost everything else, a world that coughed. We forget this now, comfortably, with our vaccines and our antibiotics, but at the turn of the century, the great killers of ordinary people were the diseases of the lung. Tuberculosis, consumption, they called it, because it seemed to consume a person from within, was everywhere, and it was a leading cause of death across the industrial world. Pneumonia carried off the old and the young by the thousand, and with these diseases came the cough, the endless, wearing, sleepless cough. A cough that could crack a rib, that could keep an entire household awake for weeks, that could exhaust a sick person past the point of recovery. I want you to sit with that, because it is the soil the whole story grew in. Controlling a cough was not a trivial comfort in that world. For a body already fighting for its life, rest was medicine, and a cough was the thief of rest. A remedy that could quiet a violent cough and let a consumptive patient finally sleep was not a luxury. It was, or it seemed to be, a genuine mercy. So the great firms of the age bent their considerable talents to the problem, and the man or the company that could produce a safe, reliable, gentle cough suppressant stood to do real good in the world, and of course, to make a very great deal of money. Those two motives, the good and the profitable, were braided together from the very beginning, and I would ask you not to be too quick to untangle them, because the people in this story mostly could not tell them apart either. The trouble was that the medicines they already had for the job were themselves a kind of poison. The old standby was morphine from the opium poppy, powerful, effective, and dangerously habit-forming, as everyone by then well knew. There was a whole quiet epidemic of morphine dependence across the 19th century. Codeine, a milder cousin, had its own limits. What the age wanted, what it dreamed of, was the effectiveness of morphine without the curse of addiction. A tamed opiate, a safe one. And that dream, that specific, seductive, entirely reasonable-sounding dream, is what led a great firm straight off a cliff. Now let me bring in the chemistry, and I will keep it as plain as I can, because the molecules are not the point and I have no wish to hand anyone a recipe. There will be none of that here. The point is the sequence of decisions and the confidence behind them. The substance at the heart of this story was not, in fact, invented by the firm that made it famous. It had first been produced years earlier, back in 1874, by an English chemist named C.R. Alder Wright, working in a London laboratory. He took morphine and, through a chemical process, altered it into a new and related compound, diacetylmorphine, to give it its proper name. And then, for the most part, it sat there, a curiosity in the scientific literature, an experiment noted and set aside. It would take another 2 decades, and a different country, and a great commercial firm with a genius for turning chemistry into product, to bring it roaring into the world. That firm was Bayer, the German chemical and pharmaceutical company, already on its way to becoming one of the most respected industrial names on the planet. In the 1890s, Bayer's chemists, the team associated with the names Felix Hoffmann and Heinrich Dreser, resynthesized this old compound, diacetylmorphine, and studied it with fresh, modern, industrial eyes. And here I must pause for a caveat, because accuracy is the whole discipline of a story like this, and I will not tidy the record to make the tale flow. The exact personal role of Felix Hoffmann is genuinely contested by historians. The same chemist's name is attached to 2 of Bayer's most famous products of that era, and how much of each was truly his own hand, versus his colleagues', versus the direction of men like Dreser, is a matter that historians still argue over. So when you hear the tidy version, this one man on this one afternoon, hold it loosely. The truth is a team and a firm and a moment, and the neat single hero story is almost always too neat. What is not in dispute is what Bayer did next. They tested the compound. They believed sincerely, on the evidence as they read it, that it was a powerful and effective suppressant of the cough, and that it was gentler and safer than the morphine it might replace. and in 1898, Bayer launched it commercially as a branded pharmaceutical product under a trademark they had chosen with some care. They called it Heroin, and that name, I think, tells you more about this whole affair than any other single fact in it, so let me linger on it. Where does a great, sober, scientific firm get a name like Heroin for a cough medicine? It comes, by the usual account, from the German word heroic. The story goes that the compound made the people who took it feel heroic, potent, strong, restored. And so a word for heroism was pressed into service as a brand. Think about what that reveals. This was not a name chosen in shame or slipped past the public in fine print. It was a name chosen with pride. A confident, chest-out, triumphant name, printed large on a clean label and set on the shelf beside the tooth powder. The firm was not hiding anything. The firm was boasting. That is how completely, how sincerely they believed in what they had made. The horror of this story, as with so many in this series, is not concealment. It is confidence. It is a great and careful institution standing up in the full light of day and telling the world with its whole chest that a thing was safe and being wrong. So how was it sold? And here I want to be precise and also fair, because the internet has done this story a great deal of loud, half-accurate damage, and I would rather you left here knowing the careful truth than the viral cartoon of it. Heroin was marketed, above all, as a cough medicine, a sedative for the cough, a suppressant, particularly for the diseases of the lung that were killing so many, the consumption, the pneumonia, the bronchitis. It was offered as a substitute for morphine and for codeine, and this is the claim that hangs the whole thing as a substitute that was supposedly not habit-forming. Non-addictive. That was the selling point. That was the miracle. Here at last, said the age, is the effectiveness of the opiate without the curse. And because it was believed to be safe, it was sold the way safe things were sold, openly, over the counter, without the ceremony of a prescription, available to more or less anyone who walked into the shop. Now, the part everyone has heard and the part I must handle with real care. The children. It is commonly said that Bayer specifically marketed heroin for infants, for babies' coughs, and you will find this stated online as flat, settled fact, often over a grainy image of some advertisement. Let me give you the honest, careful version, because it is more interesting than the slogan. It is true that in this era cough and cold preparations aimed at children could and did contain this compound, and that children were among those given it for their coughs. That much is real and grim enough. But the specific, strong claim that this one firm ran a campaign advertising heroin for infants is often overstated, and its exact strength is debated by people who have actually gone and looked at the surviving advertisements. So I will tell you the sober thing and stop there. This was medicine sold freely in a world that gave such medicines to the young and the old alike, without our fears, because it did not yet know to be afraid. Whether one particular firm's marketing went as far as the loudest modern retelling claims, treat that as contested, and be a little suspicious of anyone who tells you it is simple. And I want to dwell just for a breath on that phrase, without our fears, because it is the hinge on which the whole thing swings. You and I have grown up inside the wreckage of this exact mistake, and 100 others like it. And so we carry a wariness about such substances that is baked so deep into us we forget it is even there. A wariness these people simply did not possess because nothing had yet taught it to them. They were not reckless. They were innocent in the oldest and most dangerous sense of that word. They had not yet been hurt. The knowledge that would have stopped them cold is knowledge that was purchased over the following decades at a terrible price, by the very people in this story. We are wise about this now precisely because they were not. Do not mistake the hindsight you were handed for free for a wisdom you would have had on your own. And now, I come to the detail that turns this from a simple cautionary tale into something genuinely, beautifully strange. The fact that, when I first properly understood it, made me sit back in my chair, because at very nearly the same moment, out of the very same research effort, the very same firm, the very same swirl of chemists and ambition and confidence, came another new medicine. A second product, launched around 1899, just after the first. That second product was aspirin. Let that sit for a moment. The same lab, the same era, the same firm, in the same brief window of brilliant, confident invention, gave the world two new drugs. One of them, aspirin, went on to become perhaps the single most successful and genuinely beneficial medicine in the history of the world. A safe, cheap, reliable easer of pain and fever that has done incalculable good and is still in your cabinet right now. And the other, launched with at least as much confidence, wearing that heroic name, became one of the most notorious substances on earth. Aspirin made the fortune. Heroin made the scandal. Born together in the same room, blessed by the same clever and well-meaning people. And I cannot think of a cleaner illustration of the thing I most want you to carry out of this story than that. The people who made the catastrophic mistake were not fools and were not villains. They were demonstrably capable of world-changing good. They gave us aspirin with one hand. The same judgment, the same confidence, gave us the other. Genius and disaster came out of that firm holding hands, and no one in the room could tell at the time which was which. That is not a story about bad people. That is a far more frightening story about good ones, which raises the question you are surely asking by now, the same one I asked. How? How did the doctors believe it? How did an entire medical profession accept, even for a while, that this of all things was safe and not habit-forming? And the answer is not that they were stupid. The answer is that they were working in the dark with a very bright lamp, which is a more dangerous thing than working in the dark with none. Consider what they had to go on. They had a new compound from a firm whose scientific reputation was second to none, presented with data and confidence. They saw with their own eyes that it worked, that it genuinely quieted the most violent coughs, that patients gasping and sleepless found relief. That part was real. The medicine did what it promised in the short term, and a doctor watching a consumptive patient finally rest is a doctor inclined to believe the good news about how it was doing it, and the science of addiction itself was in its infancy. The very idea that you could measure, predict, and understand how a substance hooks a human being was not yet the settled discipline it later became. The claim that this new compound was less habit-forming than morphine was not obviously absurd on its face to the men of 1898. It was a plausible-sounding claim from a trusted source that appeared to be confirmed by short-term experience. And by the time the longer, darker truth revealed itself, the product was already on shelves across the world. That is how these things happen, not in a thunderclap of obvious wickedness, in a slow accumulation of reasonable-seeming steps, each one blessed by authority, each one appearing to work, until you look up and find yourself somewhere no reasonable person would ever have chosen to go. I saw a smaller version of this pattern many times in my own career. The confident diagnosis, the trusted authority, the reasonable step that everyone agreed with, that turned out, on the cold table at the end, to have been wrong from near the beginning. A veteran head nurse I worked alongside early on, a woman who had seen a great deal and flinched at none of it, told me once that the most dangerous two words in all of medicine are not "I don't know." They are "we're certain." I did not understand her then. I understand her completely now. Hold those two words against everyone in this story. So how did the truth come out? How does a whole world walk back from a mistake it made with such confidence? Slowly and undeniably and from the ground up. Because the thing about the promise at the center of this, that the compound was not habit-forming, is that it was a promise reality could test, patient by patient, and reality is a patient examiner, and it does not care about your trademark. As the years of the early 1900s passed and the medicine spread, the pattern that the marketing had denied began to appear anyway, in doctors' offices and in hospital wards and in ruined households, in numbers too large and too consistent to explain away. People who had taken this safe cough remedy were not, it turned out, safe from it at all. The very curse it had been sold as escaping. Dependence, the compulsion, the grip that would not let go was there, and in some respects it was worse, not milder, than the morphine it had been meant to replace. I am not going to describe to you the experience of that dependence, and I want to tell you plainly why I am not, because it is a decision and not a gap. There is a kind of storytelling that lingers on the sensation of these things, that makes them vivid and, God help us, almost alluring, and I think it is a small act of vandalism against the people who actually suffered them. So I will simply give you the sober historical shape of it. Over the first decade or so of the 20th century, the evidence that this widely sold, over-the-counter, respectably branded medicine was producing catastrophic addiction became undeniable. Not whispered. Undeniable. The safe cure had a body count and the bodies were counted, and the counting could not be argued with. The great firm itself, to be fair to the record, stopped making the product earlier than the laws that would later ban it. The tide had turned against it well before the state caught up. But the wider reckoning, the formal, legal closing of the door, came through the machinery of government, and it is worth naming because it marks the moment a society officially admitted it had been wrong. In the United States, the pivotal step was the Harrison Narcotics Act of 1914, a law that, for the first time, brought these powerful substances under real federal control, regulating and taxing them, dragging them out of the open shelf and behind the counter of the law. It did not happen overnight, and it was not aimed at this one product alone, but it marks the great turning of the era, the moment the freewheeling world of the over-the-counter opiate began, decisively, to end. And a decade later, in 1924, the United States moved to ban the manufacture of this particular compound outright. The heroic name was, by law, cast out of legitimate medicine altogether. And there, on the wrong side of the law, it has remained ever since, its long and terrible second life as an illegal drug, a story for another kind of teller than me. So there is your arc, laid out plain. A compound made in a laboratory in 1874 and left on the shelf, remade by a great and gifted firm and launched, with pride and a heroic name, in 1898 as a safe, gentle, non-addictive cough medicine for a world that desperately coughed. Sold openly, trusted widely, given even to the young. Undone within a single decade by the one thing its makers had sworn it did not do, and formally cast out by the law within a generation. The cure in this case, and I have been waiting the whole story to say it, and I will let myself say it only once, and quietly, the cure was considerably worse than the cough. Medicine, ladies and gentlemen, do not try this. Obviously. I allow myself that one line, and only because I need its sharp edge to make the turn that is the whole reason I told you any of this. Because it would be so easy, so comfortable to close the file here, with a smug little shudder. To picture the firm as a pack of cynics, and the doctors as fools, and the whole affair as a barbarity of the ignorant past that we, clever and modern and safe, would obviously never fall for. And that picture is a lie, and I have spent too long with the truth to send you away holding it. These were not, for the most part, cynics. They were among the finest scientific minds of their age, at one of the most admired firms in the world. The same firm, the same people, the same confidence, that in the very same breath handed humanity aspirin. The doctors who prescribed it were educated, sincere men trying to help suffering patients with the best that the best authority in the world had to offer. The mothers who bought that reassuring bottle were doing exactly what careful, loving people do, trusting the experts, trusting the science, trusting the great and respectable name on the label. The horror of this story is not that it was done by wicked people. The horror is that it was done, at enormous scale, by clever and even admirable ones, with the full endorsement of the most prestigious institutions of their day. That is so much more frightening than a villain. A villain you can simply refuse to be. And this is where I turn away from the past for a moment and turn gently to you. Because I did not walk you through this particular strange sorrow just so you could feel superior to the people who lived it, though the temptation is right there and I felt it too. Look at what actually made this possible. Not evil. 3 ordinary things braided tightly together. There was a real problem, genuine suffering, a world that truly did cough itself to death, a need that was not imaginary. There was prestige, the stamp of a great and trusted institution, whose confidence made questioning it feel almost like ignorance, and whose other products really were as good as they claimed. And there was the promise of a safe, easy fix, the effectiveness you wanted with the danger engineered away, the miracle of getting the benefit without paying the price. A real problem, a trusted authority, and the promise of a safe solution. Put those 3 together, and good and careful people will hand a thing to their own children and mean it with their whole hearts. And I want you to notice that not one of those 3 ingredients has gone anywhere. We still have real problems we are desperate to solve. We still, rightly, trust our great institutions and our brilliant firms and our experts. And we should, most of the time, because most of the time they are the best we have, and most of the time they are giving us the aspirin and not the other thing. And we are, if anything, more in love than ever with the promise of the safe, clean, engineered fix, the product that will give us the good part and spare us the cost. The exact conditions that produce this are the water we still swim in. So here is the question I would like you to actually sit with, and it is not a comfortable one, and it is not meant to be. Not how could they have been so foolish, but rather what is it right now in our own time that a great and trusted name assures us is safe, that the experts endorse, that promises the benefit without the cost, that a careful person 100 years from now will read about and go very quiet. Because there is something. There is always something. Every generation is certain it has finally learned to tell the aspirin from the poison at the moment of invention, and every generation is partly wrong, and does not yet know which part. The people in this story were not more foolish than us. They were us with the same trust, the same hope, the same reasonable, easily reassured human heart, and a little less hindsight than we happen to have been given for free. The lesson is not to trust nothing. That way lies its own kind of madness, and you would never take a sensible medicine again, which would be its own small tragedy. The lesson is smaller and harder than that. It is to remember that a trusted name is not the same as proof, that a promise of safety should make us a little more careful and not a little less, and that the largest mistakes in the history of medicine were made not by the reckless, but by the confident. And that is exactly what I would love to hear from you down in the comments, because I do read them, and this one I find myself genuinely curious about. Not to be clever, to be honest. What do you think it is? What is something our own age is sure of, endorsed and respectable, and sold to us as safe, that you quietly suspect the future will look back on the way we now look back on a heroic name on a bottle of cough syrup? Tell me what you think our descendants will go quiet about. I want to read what you see. A young colleague of mine, I will call him Toby, for he would not thank me for the attention, and he goes a little pale at the difficult stories. Asked me once whether it ever stops feeling strange, learning things like this. And I told him the truth, which is no, it does not, and that the day it starts to feel ordinary is the day you have stopped paying proper attention. We carry these stories carefully, because the people in them trusted what they were told, exactly as we do, and paid for it, as we one day might. For my part, I will keep doing what old coroners do, which is telling you the true and careful reasons behind things, one story at a time, with respect for everyone in them and no false comfort at the end. If you would like to sit in on the next one, and there are a great many of these stories still to tell, then do subscribe, and I will keep them coming. This has been a story about a great firm, a heroic name, and the terrible ease of calling something safe. Be a little kinder to the past than the jokes allow, and be a little more careful with the reassurances of your own age than feels comfortable. My name is Hollis. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you at the next one.